All right, we're gonna start our meeting. Thank you all for coming. This is our executive committee meeting for May. Just to let you know, I have a hard stop at 11. I think we'll get through before then, but if not, I'm gonna ask Howard to take on. Roll call.
Well, you better wake up.
Just towards the end. Everybody is here except Liz Gibbons, who emailed me saying she did not make it today. We'll move to public comment on items not on the agenda. I have one card for something on the agenda. Anything not on the agenda?
Actually, just real quick, James Talea, I live in Sunnyvale.
Must be friendly.
I just wanted to say I was very impressed with some of the meetings that were set up by staff Amy Bailey and her team. I participated up in San Francisco on the virtual power plant discussion that they organized through GridWorks, and that was a set of people in that room that GridWorks had pulled together for the benefit of our community that I don't think I've seen in a long time. Really amazing set of knowledgeable people, experts in their area. It was a whole room of 30, 40 people. The team is really doing a good job of collecting input from experts to try to drive what we're doing in our program area. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing. Always appreciate good comments. All right, we'll move on then to our consent calendar, approval of the minutes from April meeting. Are there any corrections or comments? Approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion carries. We go to the regular calendar. Item 2 is our August 2019 rate update.
So I'll start this off. It is going to be a bit of a tag team with the Dons. Remember, these are the Dons.
The power down.
Oh, yes. And it's Friday too, so we're in for some entertainment. But I wanted to frame this so we did give you an updated presentation yesterday, which essentially changed the recommendation. So we have a recommendation essentially for a 3% discount to our rates. I wanted to give some context. We'll get into the details and the history, but some context of why I'm looking at that too. We are going to bring to the board some options on how to maybe reduce our power supply costs by still maintaining ourselves as carbon free. Are there ways in which we can utilize PCC2 with carbon offsets or reduce the amount of renewable power? It will still be about the state minimum, but as we move to a whole clean, hourly clean grid, you know, with SB 100, etc., there's a bit of a trade-off of how much money we want to be spending to get all these PCC1 resources. And things have changed since we put all this together about 2 years ago. For example, renewable power prices have changed. When we put this together, it was about $15 a megawatt hour. Now it's trading more at about $20 a megawatt hour. We would love to get a credit rating. I think from both our ability to finance projects, but also from a legislative standpoint, getting a credit rating would be great. It's seeing our sister agency, PCE, get a credit rating much quicker than we expected. And I think our finances tend to mirror them, though not as good as theirs. Those are reasons.
Finances are not as good.
No.
I am suspicious as to the way they presented it, but I think we should have a different analysis to decide.
Yeah, we will get into that. So they find, for example, they are 90% carbon free versus 100% carbon free on our side. So essentially there are certain, and they started earlier than us. And when we started, we thought our margins were going to be closer to about 25% or so a year. Now it's about half that essentially. So when I look at ways in which we can build up our reserves to go through, whether it's power price volatility, getting a credit rating, et cetera, that moved me more into the 3% zone than into the 4. This essentially will get us another $3 million a year. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to Don Brett.
All right, with that, shall we go to, okay. All right, so I will take you through the twists and turns. Most recently in April, you approved a 3% increase to rates. We called it an interim increase because we anticipated that in August, we were going to be reducing them again by 2%. And we were gonna have to do that because we were anticipating a very significant price reduction from PG&E in their July rates when they were issued. Our mid-May projections now are, surprise, surprise, really different than what we had originally assumed. And so we're now looking at, rather than a cumulative impact of a significant rate reduction from PG&E, we're actually seeing rates be even or a slight increase. And that's looking at the combined effect of PCIA and the gen rate. So when we had presented the 3% increase and anticipated the 2% decrease, we had given you projections for contribution margin, we had given you projections for what it meant to our rates, and we said we would introduce guardrails should, so we threw that term out and said, if, okay, that's a Nancyism. Yeah, that we would attempt to bound that 1% expectation around our discount to PG&E. Should things turn out, substantially more in our favor, attempt to come up with some guardrails or some way to define, in a sense, a framework for how we might move off of that 1%. So that's what we're going to show you. This basically just summarizes what I said, but I'll hit the numbers. We thought PCIA was going to increase by 1.5%, impacting our revenues. You divide PCI basically by 3, that this would impact our revenues by a negative 0.5% to stay even. We thought PG&E's generation rates would decrease by 6.5%. You add those two together. We thought that, again, to stay even, we were going to have to reduce rates by 7%. That's a non-starter, so in response, we were going to decrease our discount from 6% to 1%, in a sense, absorb 5% of that required decrease, leaving us with a net anticipated 2% decrease. All right, now things have changed. We're looking at a PCIA that will go up by 10.5%. So that impacts our revenues by a negative 3.5%. Okay, so this is worse than we thought, but this is just.
All that, just to remind us, all that money's going to PG&E.
It's going to PG&E, yeah.
That's why we trust that number. We know it's fair, honest, and accurately computed in the best interest of the customers in the state of California are. That's on record. Thank you to the CPUC.
And here's some additional money going to PG&E. Gen rates will increase by an average of around 4% versus, again, a previously anticipated decrease. So you can see a huge swing here, basically a 10% swing. But if you look at the impact of this here, we're seeing that we would have to increase rates by 0.5% to maintain that 6% discount relative to PG&E. So this is a big change in assumptions, and we're going to have a guardrails discussion. This is just a nice graphic.
I love it.
Okay, yeah, I know we got Don E to thank for this.
Don E special.
Yeah, it's, if you see a good graphic, it probably came from Paley.
The terms are much wilder than that.
Yeah.
No, for this rate situation.
Okay. So one of the, there are a couple things we have to have the board decide. One is what, again, if we believe the new numbers, what sort of discount level and increase in customer rates, et cetera, is the right balance. And that's what this shows. How do we turn that off?
Click distance, the X, the lower right.
Okay, now I have.
So go back, because I'm confused
Yeah.
with the previous slide.
I have to figure out how to go backwards.
Previous, just click on previous now, you got that right.
Actually, no, I
You got
got
that,
So we
No
raised.
problem. Tech support.
Okay.
Yeah, we
Okay.
avoided.
Yes, okay.
We raised our rates 3%, no matter weeks ago, right? If we do nothing, if we don't change the rates at all right now, where do we actually land?
So we would in effect wind up very close to that bottom row. So a little lower than that, because this did assume to stay at 6%, a 0.5% rate bump.
So that's from
But
where we are?
From where we are right now.
Right now.
Yeah, so you can see the cumulative 2019 rate change, 3.5%, to answer your question. If we did nothing,
That was where I
subtract,
started.
subtract half a percent, so maybe it's in the 5 million range, something like that. Above our mid-year.
So now you, wait a minute, don't go that last column, the mid-year projection. Tell me what that number is. Is that the total number, or is this a delta number?
That would be the delta. So what we did is we reset the baseline to say, all right, we assumed a 3% rate increase now in May, and then the same assumptions that Dom showed you, the 6.5% rate decrease.
Right.
And we said, where would we be over the next till January 2020? And we picked this time period because we think that would be the next time we change rates would be as soon as this February.
But in total, what's our net operations number? How much are we on the plus side?
So in total, we
Yeah.
would be about 34 million baseline, and this would add another 12 to that. So this would put us somewhere in that $40 million net surplus range.
Wait a minute, we're 33 now.
Right now, we're 29. We reset, that was the budget. We reset the budget, or the baseline, to include the 3% rate increase
Which
in
we
May.
just did. So what's that number?
And that's gonna be 32.
32, and then you would add 12 more to that 32,
Correct.
which would give us 44,
Correct.
with some high degree of variability.
And our reserve target
It would take us very close to that would take us, instead of finishing the year at, I'm looking at calendar year, the same period here, of about 110 million, this would be about 120 million, which would get us very close to the
Midpoint.
to the midpoint, to the target.
which is half of 250 here.
It's half of the operating budget, yeah,
Which is?
250.
It's half, 50%.
Yes, so the reserve targets are at 25%, 50%, and 75% is the low, mid, and high.
We passed the low, we'd really love to get to the mid.
Yes. But I'd like to get to the high.
Oh, I got that.
Well, you should go to the dispensary. I'm just trying to close the circle on the conversation.
For the minutes.
Because I don't see how we're gonna do it with the PCIA fluctuating the way it is. I mean, wow.
Our friends in the north
There's a lot of
are
uncertainty
projecting
going
a $350 million surplus in 5 years.
380 to be precise.
I don't know how anybody can make any predictions with what the CPC.
I don't know how you can predict, quarter to quarter, let alone year on year.
And not to
Okay.
mention these bills going through the assembly.
Yeah, they're not helping us either. Thank you for explaining this slide, those
Okay,
questions
and just to,
don't
I
make
mean,
it
just,
clear.
just to take you up the ladder here, so if we did effectively nothing, if we made a very small change, and kept our discount at 6%, we still gained, we gained half of that 12 number. But then moving up the ladder, if we increase rates, by another 2% or another 3.5% or 5%, this is just how the result works out. So it's
So
a.
Point.
Yeah, your box says our customers would see they will have seen an 8% increase this year.
Correct. Cumulative.
And we will be maintaining a 3% discount in that case versus PG. Okay?
And the 8% we're going up is also the same as PG&E.
Yeah. Okay. All right, now the next couple slides are a little more.
PG&E is going at 8, we would be going at 8 as well, under your,
Yeah, well, since we're reducing our discount, we're technically going up a little bit more, right? But we're relatively speaking, we're still under, we're still 3%. Okay, now the next couple slides get a little more wonky, but they attempt to describe guardrails. And what we're saying is, we can't be 100% sure that the rate change in PCIA assumptions we just showed you are actually what we're gonna see.
Really?
As of July 1, yeah.
I'm stunned, I'm just,
Going out on a limb today. So,
the energy market in California is predictable and it's saying.
so this is,
regulatory environment stable.
so what if the PCIA or gen rates change from this, the new assumptions we just showed you, or if they wiggle a little bit? And that's probably what's more likely to happen, is that there'll be some fine tuning. So this is the basic formula or function. The net rate impact to us is a function of PG&E's rate change and to some extent, a lesser extent, the PCIA rate change. So generally a function of the PG&E rate change and about a third of the PCIA change. So current example, that 0.5 to the positive rate impact we showed is a 4% increase plus this number divided by 3. But we could see, a lower price increase, 3%, and maybe the same PCIA or the same price increase on the gen side, but a lower PCIA increase. Anyway, using this number here, which is just the result of how these play together, is how we constructed the guardrail idea. So the
How did
table,
you get to the divide by 3?
because the PCIA is equal to about a third of the generation rate. And again, that's round numbers and it varies a little bit by, but if you look across, I guess, all rate categories, it's, so this is just showing you these elements, right? And then this was the table that we showed you earlier, so that's the current math and the impact to gen rates that we're currently expecting, and we built this thing off of this number. But if this number were to change, then we created this table, okay? So, actually, this, should have slid this down, but, so this number should be here.
This is the Nancy table.
Yeah, so, yeah, the column on the left should be slid down one, this should be correlated with that. But anyway, so right now we have a 0.5. What we're saying is if we wind up anywhere between 0 and 1 when we do that PCIA gen rate math, that we would be on this row right here. Again, imagine that slid down one.
So do you mean in this manner?
It should go like that.
Oh.
Yes, like that. Okay.
So, just starting at the top of
Yeah.
the leftmost column, what should those things be rated?
Okay, this,
Should we
This-
more than 3% maybe?
yeah, good question. Yeah, so if we slide the whole thing down one,
Don't you really want to slide the blue box up?
well, because then you're
Columns
at
don't
4%.
So you've just
Yeah.
done all the math here, regardless of where the box is, all the math is here to maintain the same sort of margin dollars.
Yeah,
Goals.
and the same, this should be 5%.
Yeah.
We made some, sorry,
Yeah.
that was actually last minute changes that we didn't fully coordinate, so
Transit picky.
just stay with us while we go through this.
Yeah, so this should say, this row, this column is correct, this should say 5%, and this column is correct. So essentially, we migrate the discount up or down based on what actually comes in, on the PCIA and gen increase. So, yeah, if things come in even more to our favor, we would go to a 4% discount. If things come in less in our favor, we would go to a 2% discount. And it's hard, I say this, my fingers crossed and stuff, but it's hard to imagine that we're gonna see a giant swing at this point, just based on how close we are and how, I think, relatively tight the expectations are. We
Make
might-
sure those exact words are in the minute.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Sorry.
So, yeah, it's probably more likely that if we were to see the guardrails actually employed, that it would be, a 1% move up or down in the discount, based on actual results. So that's the idea. We'll get these numbers straight up for you.
So there's another way to do that in tables.
Okay.
If you go back. Right, if we're trying to manage sort of the public perception side to this whole thing, what you could have done is you could have done a table that said, let's maintain exactly 3% discount. And then based on the variability of the gen rate PCIA thing, you could have worked through and said, here's your margin dollars, which is sort of like the first table you did. I'm actually more of a fan of trying to settle out how much we want to raise the customers' rates. And 8% is an uncomfortable number already, I should just say. I don't think I would want to raise our rates more than 8%. And so that has an interesting bearing on this table.
We had already increased 3 to 4, so it's a
okay.
cumulative.
Yeah, I'm talking cumulative,
Okay.
sorry.
Yes, Mark.
And so,
So Howard, if we do 3% and the PG&E final numbers turns out to be a higher rate increase, we get more revenue and the rate increase will be more than 8%.
that, again, I get the more revenue part, I do, and I get the value of that.
Right.
I worry about the public perception of we're doing all this goodness for everybody, but we've just raised your rates 8%.
So doing it this way keeps a constant 8% raise.
Yes.
That's what this table shows. So now,
I see what you're saying.
yeah.
So, I guess I.
So the 3.5, imagine that's 5%.
Yeah, we can literally change these numbers. I mean, if we have the presentation, maybe that would help while we're having the conversation.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah, I get it.
Or you get it.
The table has got me twisted up sideways.
We'll update it right now.
But I think if we agree
Mhm.
that we're not gonna raise the rates more than 8% and the margin is going to slide around a little bit,
Yeah.
'cause that's what'll happen.
Actually, the margin also stays the same.
Stays about the same, it's the discount that changes.
We change the discount to keep the rate increase the same.
It's kind of a question of, what are
The
customers?
discount is to me, is the byproduct, it's not the starting point. I get it though. You can work the math either way.
And I mean, the discount is
But in
important
terms of like-
in customer conversations.
But when we talk about guardrails, right?
Yeah.
For me, one of the boundaries, one of the sides of the box that I think I'd like staff to operate in would be, let's not raise our rates more than 8%. That's already uncomfortable for me. And then the other numbers,
Cumulative.
put some other, cumulative of 8%. The other numbers, we could talk about how they change. But I wouldn't want you guys coming back saying, hey, good news, we've stayed at a 3% discount and all of our customers are getting an 11% increase.
Yeah.
I feel really uncomfortable having to go tell everybody, hey, 11%, we're doing good for you.
Yeah, and that exact thing is what's the spirit behind this, which is,
Yes.
8%.
You just need.
Yeah, and they'd get a better discount. Yeah, they'd get a better discount in that case.
I know, here's
Some, but not all.
here's the problem, you know, we are compared directly to PG&E,
Yeah.
but Joe generic Saratoga customer doesn't see on their bill where it says, had you stayed with PG&E, you would have gotten this increase, but since you've stayed with Silicon Valley Clean Energy, you've gotten this. And so instead what I got is, hey, last May my rates went up.
Right. I think this is really the balance, right, of like, rates have gone up, but you still have a discount, and then how many of our customers are actually engaged with that level of detail? I mean, those who really are, they're probably gonna call the call center, and then they'll know that, oh yeah, you continue to have a discount.
No, they're gonna go on next door and say, we're all being scammed.
That's also,
Right. That's my,
I'm-
calling the call center, I'm all for that,
Yeah.
call there all day.
yeah,
But go on next door and say, look,
yeah,
this
rates
whole-
are increasing again.
yeah, this scam is not working out now, where they just raised them and now they're raising them again, and my bill is 10% higher than last year. Of course, they installed a pool and a hot tub, so now it's 40% higher than last year. That's the stuff that goes out on
So
next.
let's also be clear that our energy prices this year have gone up substantially,
I
right?
know, I get all that.
So I think maybe a way of doing that is also, you know, we are on top of it at next door. So
Are we?
it's tough for us to get an account on each one of them. But I know at least the other social media sites, they do allow us to, we've had difficulty getting on Nextdoor. I know some cities are able to do like generic kind of emails to all the
Just
different areas.
outbound.
Yes.
Yes,
They're not a city.
that's, we're working with them, we haven't been able to break through yet.
Not all cities are helping.
No, with Nextdoor.
Next door,
No, next
Can you
door,
work through?
they
our
don't have the
city?
concept of of an authority.
Are you able to work with our cities folks to
You
get
know what?
in there?
Yeah, I think that would be the way to do
our
it.
city
city
does
is
newsletter
next
and
door.
stuff,
Yeah.
citywide that way.
I'm actually so pissed at next door. I don't, while I appreciate that some people are looking at it, it is such a toxic
It's, yeah, it is.
cesspool that
Well, that is
I don't feel
so-
strongly
I
about
think that's the
supporting.
point he's making, right?
Yeah, it's
It
ready
just
to
takes a
go
couple of-
rant.
Yeah.
Okay.
My city's
So this is
kind of weird, we got almost
that's the
10,000
updated
people
version.
on it, and it's actually gone to a pretty positive space.
Yeah,
Every once in a while,
After they made this big change.
every once in a while, some ugly thing shows up, but a lot of people are like, hey, that's wrong, knock it off.
Wow.
It's, they've sort of started to self-moderate in the city, which is interesting. But you have to have facts to be able to counter that, and that's the problem.
Gonna have to really kind of see it.
Okay, can we move
Yeah,
on
it's-
to, oh,
We just pulled it up.
A new and revised picture.
Real time.
James, why don't I go to you while we're doing this? Do you have comments?
Yeah, so James Toya, resident of Sunnyvale. I support this, the bottom line is I support the staff recommendation. It's the right balance, in my view, of trying to deal with the large increase in the gen rate by PG&E and the huge PCIA, but, you know, the increase for SVCE would only be roughly half that. So it's trying to mitigate that, at the same time, all the risks and uncertainties are really real, that we need to be closer to that midpoint in the amount of reserves to be able to manage that well. Other CCEs, newer ones in the state, are having a much harder time because they didn't get started enough, they don't have enough reserves to be able to balance, and they're having to tell their, down in the LA area, they're planning to tell their folks about an increase above PG&E rates because they can't mitigate. So we're in a good position to be able to mitigate, but we wanna maintain, I think, that at least mid-ground, if not get into that upper area. But I think at this point, we can get, you know, I would agree that anything above 8% starts to get kind of scary, but I think it's a good balance. It's not ideal, but there is no ideal answer. This seems to be the best optimized answer in my view. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead with your
Move
comment.
the
All right.
blue box now. Instead of blue box.
No, you don't need to make any more changes, I get it. But I'm clueless,
So,
Howard.
so that, yeah, so
I'm
Howard
clueless.
gets it, let's move.
I mean, other
Let
aspects.
somebody else
Yeah, that
answer.
was-
Yeah,
So,
okay.
other elements of what I wanted to mention was related to what Grish mentioned at the beginning about making sure to adjust, it's not a main topic here, but the planning for the board meeting, I'm not gonna be at the board meeting, but I'm gonna be away on vacation, but,
Oh, hi.
yeah. It's anniversary trip.
Aw.
So, sorry, you guys lose, my wife wins.
Yeah.
So trying to maintain that carbon-free status is actually a real challenge. There are, essentially issues with trying to, with the details of the accounting of how that stuff works. And so I think there's some, as Garish hinted, that of the future, there's gonna need to be a little bit of adjustments and maybe offsetting these new accounting rules for what comes in from the rest of the grid, that PCC2, that comes along with some, what used to be no emissions, but now is getting emissions added to it. So we want to just maintain that good story of carbon-free, but at the margins and it's a little bit of of really an accounting issue. So we want to try to maintain the carbon-free, but allow for the renewables from all over the grid, and these rates and the dollars, the margins, and having that reserves, I think, is really important.
All right. Oh, Bruce, yes.
If this is the appropriate
Yeah,
time. So, I'm Bruce Carney from Mountain View. I've been tracking PG&E's residential electricity price changes for over a dozen years. And as I've mentioned previously, they historically have changed their rates 3 to 5 times per year. There have been some downs, but there are more ups than downs. As we look forward to how in the world we're going to deal with the disasters in Paradise and other cities, I think PG&E's rates will be rising more than 10% a year for the next several years. Whether they load that into the generation rate or into the distribution rate, to be determined, but I would imagine it's going to go on the T&D side, not the generate side, which means that SVCE's customers will also see 10% plus price change. So I would hate to see the board make a policy about some sort of maximum price increase, because I don't think you'll be able to enforce it. The other thing that I'll say is that, pretty obviously, electric usage month to month varies far more than 8%. So if you happen to raise your prices in a month when usage is decreasing, it will be far less noticeable that anything changed than if you raise it in a month when electricity usage is increasing. Most customers in this area do not have air conditioning, so their summer bills are lower than their winter bills because there's less lighting and no heating. So a July rate increase of 8% would be far less noticeable than a December increase of 8%. Just throw those things out for your consideration. I think it's really critical to maintain as much operating flexibility as possible. The previous CEO, had a real major point about rate stability. I don't think that's a key thing that you should be using to drive your decisions.
Thank you.
So, just to ask a question, residential customers have a lower electricity bill typically in summer than winter, but
Depends a
commercial
lot
customers
where
is
you
quite
are.
different.
Depends on, if you're in the South County, a lot of air conditioning down there, very different electric use profile than the majority of the population up north.
I do have a comment too.
Sure. Go ahead.
I mean, I appreciate all this, and we don't want to stress out, and we don't want to do anything too abrupt, I get all that. But, yeah, I mean, for me, the bigger goal is, and the bigger consideration for me is the environment in which we're operating, which is a very uncertain one. And we had previously, right, hoped to get increase
What do you mean by in line?
to the midpoint. We had expected to fill our bucket to 50% by now. The fact that we have these violent swings, much more than any rate increase we're talking about, the PCIA, and these, uncertainty in PG&E's environment, and also, right, something maybe predictable but not so clear is we also have a lot more CCAs forming to compete for the same clean resources. So we are in a very uncertain environment, which causes me to want to get that reserve bucket to a very ample point. And so I think you have to do it when you can. So I'm not, unlike Howard perhaps, I'm not at all uncomfortable with that 8%. I think God knows what any one of these bills is going to do to us, what direct access will mean for us, what CPUC seemingly hell-bent on taking control of everything would mean for our future. So I think when it's raining, we ought to put our bucket out and collect the water, so to speak. That's kind of where I'm coming from. So I'm supportive of mitigating our risk to ensure our future.
Okay.
Do you want to finish?
Let's get to the
Well,
recommendation.
okay, so you've seen this slide before, we're obviously operating at very uncertain times.
Now you gotta put the rod sinks bucket out there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
It's
so,
just a dam, Howard, a dam.
yeah,
A little generator.
again, a decent summary, a key year to build reserves, continuing to negotiate for additional long-term power resources. We're looking into this power prepay concept. We're looking at lowering power supply costs with PCC2, which may be a temporary benefit because of, I assume regulatory
Expiring
changes
rate,
to, and then we're going to be working on obtaining a credit rating, so this will certainly boost our position there, and expanding our line of credit. Anything else you'd add?
You know, when I talked to Jan, I asked her what she thought the primary benefit was. And it's maybe less about lines of credit, but the ability to negotiate for new contracts. She said, we're getting deals done on more favorable terms.
Right.
So even if we don't need a line of credit, the ability to negotiate more favorably, she thought was the most significant thing. So I would, I mean, assuming you
Investment.
validate that, I would make that point. We want to be buying more resources. And even if we don't use a line of credit,
So,
never use
in
a line
other
of
words,
credit.
building a reserve now saves us money later, because it puts us in a better position soon.
No, I'm specifically referring to the reason to go for a credit.
Right.
The reason is, when we go procure new
Yeah.
resources, we can get a better deal, or at least Jan thinks
Right.
this.
Yeah.
Well, no, we've always thought that too, as part of the
So
motivation.
it's more than, I just distinguish it from a line of credit.
Yeah.
A line of credit is,
We would tell some power suppliers that, hey, the bank's willing to give us that line of credit, so maybe we should also.
But in terms of a focus on continuing to increase reserves, that supports getting a credit rating, which supports saving money.
I just found her, so I will just say I found her reason for pursuing the credit rating. She said, I've been working on this since the beginning, and the reason why is I wanted to have a better platform to negotiate with the folks that.
But you heard that here first.
Right, so that's the first bullet, actually, the long-term power supply negotiations.
Yes.
Because on the other side, they have these developers have to go to their finance committees and go to all these equity investors. So as soon as you hear, oh, the counterparty on the other side has a credit rating,
And you know exactly
we
where you're
fit into a particular box. Then you can make changes to that box and those ratings, but right now, we don't fit in any box.
Yeah, no, if you just back up the slide one. I was kind of tethering those last points together with the fact.
It's the first bullet, the long-term power supply negotiations.
Yeah,
So yeah, the credit rating helps with,
with that,
yes.
and not just the line.
Oh, yes, oh, completely.
So I'm sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
Your point is focused on reserves
It's reserves and the credit rating will help, yeah.
with either of
All
those.
of these.
Ready to move? All right, so,
Not yet.
I'm sorry.
are we not?
No, I'm just, she asked me if I have comments, I said not yet.
Oh, go ahead, please, good luck.
So, just to summarize the recommendation, that we would move toward a 3% discount, assuming PG&E gen change and PCI change that we're now thinking will happen. This would result in a 5% increase in SVCE rates from May 1, additional contribution of $12 million over the next 6 months. And it maintains our discount at a midpoint, if we want to think of a 6%, 1%, or 3% now. So there's a good explanation there, discount-wise. And that we're looking for the board to recommend that the CEO and staff implement this change, subject to the framework, the guardrails that we presented. So if PG&E's rate changes come in favorably relative to these assumptions, we could see that discount tick up a little bit, but we still would have the same 8% rate increase. We wouldn't be creating a bigger rate increase. And vice versa, if the rate went down, the rates go down relative to us, PG&E. So that was the report.
Can I just
Sure.
add a little more public comment
Yeah.
at the end? So this is, I'm wearing a different hat. James Talea with Home Energy Analytics. We run a program funded through PG&E called Home Intel. It's for energy efficiency. We reduce energy waste by analyzing people's smart meter data and gas and electric, so we can help figure out where people's waste is and help them save money. And another byproduct of analyzing gas, like what we're doing with Peninsula Clean Energy right now, we're involved in one of their pilots to help analyze the gas usage to help them figure out how to fuel switch for electrification efforts in the future. So one of the nice things about helping to get the word out about the Home Intel program, it's no cost to the customer at all because it's paid for by ratepayer dollars already in the pot, that we can help reduce people's bills, and the average reduction is 13%. So if this organization would help us get the word out about the Home Intel program, which is already available through PG&E administration and funding through ratepayer dollars, then that can help mitigate the residential customers' increases. Thanks for listening.
Great. Any other comments on this? Good. Thumbs up.
Yeah, I agree with staff's recommendation. And I'm glad we had already discussed the guardrails at our last meeting,
Yes. Thank you,
which
Nancy.
I think saved time in this meeting.
Great.
All
Okay.
right, we will bring it up next board meeting of June 12th.
Double check all those graphics.
Yes, we would, we will update those.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want a formal vote?
Do we need
It's a
to-
discussion item.
I
Oh.
wasn't sure if you had
It's
that
it's only a
discussion,
Did we
so.
set up this discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get our feedback, so we're good.
Yeah, so we could say all the executive committee members present express support.
And we could make a quick vote if you want.
It doesn't matter, we're all there to say we express
Yeah.
support anyway. Fine.
Well, I mean, I'll move staff recommendation.
you already
Or
did?
did you want to move, you moved in?
Oh,
I'll
yeah, I
second
already,
it.
oh.
Okay, so,
Move and second.
other discussion, all those in favor?
All right.
Great.
Okay.
I won't be at the board meeting.
Where you-
Because of my
Yeah, the
alternate,
anniversary.
but I'm happy to be on record.
Who's your alternate?
Darcy.
Oh,
Yeah, it is Darcy, that's right.
Okay.
All
All
right,
right.
moving on to.
Who seconded that?
I did. Number 3, strategic plan update.
Okay, so, we'll kind of tag team this to a certain extent also. So our strategic plan, the board adopted it, right after formation.
Yes.
And we've updated it a couple of times last year, in July and December. And I think it's just good practice that every year you just kind of go through it, brush things up. So this strategic plan, I'd say, is a combination of a strategic plan and a work plan.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
There's a lot of detail in here.
Yes.
But I think as a startup agency, it's good to have that transparency so that the public and everyone knows a certain level of detail of what we're doing. So I think it's a good product but it's a combination of a work plan and strategic plan. What we did this year, all the directors looked at it again, because things have changed, and we have made some changes. There's a red line in your packet, so there's a lot of clarification associated with this update. And we are also clarifying what are major changes and minor changes to the strategic plan. On the workplace, there are no major changes, that section. However, and then we've combined some sections that were repetitive. Talk about evaluating wellness benefits to industry benchmark at least once every 2 years. Could do it more often, but at least once every 2 years. Customer and community, the big change is in response to direct access. So we didn't have this the last time, we updated in July. So now that we do have direct access, margin analysis is very important. So we added that. We also used to have programs under the community section. We've moved that out because now that we've adopted a decarbonization plan last December, there's a lot more detail and fleshing out. We thought it deserved its own separate section. So we have a separate section of decarb and grid innovation programs. Finance and fiscal responsibility, again, clarification on the minor side. We've done things like commit to excellence, that kind of gets reflected. It's reflective of, we've developed core values for the organization. We've introduced a performance appraisal system, and part of that was creating core values. So under the finance and admin, the minor changes, committing to excellence is essentially all of us. The major change is advancing achieving the investment grade. It used to be first quarter of 2021. This we're talking end of 2020, but as you saw from Don's slide from the previous, Don's comment in the previous section, we're starting this quarter, we're reaching out to Moody's.
Seems like we should be done in a year.
I'm sorry?
By summer next year, we should be done.
That's the goal.
Yeah, so,
We're soon.
yeah, maybe it's summer 2020. Regulatory and legislative, it's a lot of clarifying changes. I think it's quite reflective of what direction the board gave to be more active on the legislative and regulatory side. So about, the hiring the lobbyists, the ad hoc ledge committee has been more active. So it's a clarification here. Power supply, the major changes have to do with two things. One is direct access, because direct access is going to be something that's cross-division, so to speak. And the other change is what I teed up at the beginning of the last presentation, is to clarify PCC2 and PCC1. I think we kind of went with an understanding, which may not have been, basically, gotten by PCC one, and I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page that PCC two is also an option, but make sure that we still remain carbon free. IT made just minor changes, and that's about it. So I
Back
should-
on IT, right, my only biggest issue, and I think you already covered all the
Cyber.
sides, this is security, I just fear being hacked.
I tell you that that's a issue that we have. You wanna talk to that?
Yeah, so we just completed the AMI audit, and we also have another general agency IT audit that we're wrapping up. As well as we issued an RFI for cybersecurity ideas out there that may lead to another RFP. So we've got those things we're gonna present at the audit committee.
And internal phishing training?
Yes, we did have that actually.
For the first time, so last month, no one got fished.
Oh, good,
100% success.
that's pretty hard.
Nicely done, staff.
And Nick sent some pretty tough ones.
The latest one was really good.
That
Yeah, I
was-
mean,
that's very good.
He will send things, so when Don was talking about benefits in February, we were rolling out benefits, he sent a phishing email from the benefits administrator. So he's quite sneaky. In April,
yeah.
So it's not an easy test.
No, no.
in April, he sent something up about taxes and IRS and blah,
Oh, yeah,
blah.
that's pretty common.
Yeah. So he's making it, it's not just, he's just not picking something off a list. He's trying to get a sense of where people's minds are and try and trick us, but he wasn't able to trick us last month.
So out of that audit, I don't see a lot of changes to the strategy, but I do think we'll have some updates to the IT policies. We'll probably bring to you in August.
So I think the key point, Howard, where you brought up, which is the bigger picture, so we've done the AMI audit and the IT audit, I'd say, I don't wanna minimize it, but it's more plain vanilla. But the RFI that he sent out is more holistic. And the reason we're doing RFI, it's almost like, hey, we need someone to come us and advise us on the whole picture. When you talk about defense in depth and everything else. All right, give us a sense of how we need to structure that protection.
Yeah, excellent, okay, good, thank you. I wish my city would do as well.
So this is also, in terms of the budget adoption, this is the first step in kind of budget adoption.
Right.
Once you tell us, yep, we're good, there's certain things that roll into budget preparation, which the first draft you'll see in August, and then come to adoption in September.
Good. Any questions? Any public comments? Yes, Bruce?
Yep, Bruce Carney, Mountain View again. I'm hiding behind Don because I'm not feeling really photogenic today. So I've read a lot of different documents in the last several years, and I believe that in the founding document of SVCEA, there is essentially a couple of paragraphs that give the agency permission to do any kind of special pricing arrangement that it wants, essentially to operate with the flexibility that any direct access provider would operate with. I don't know whether that flexibility has ever been used at this stage or not, but given the direct access portal opening up in the future, I imagine it will be used. And so then the question that I think this body, or maybe the finance committee or the risk committee, should be thinking about is, how, let's use the guardrails again. What are the parameters that the organization would use to decide how sweet a deal to cut, how long, to engage for, given that prices are volatile, and those things probably ought to be discussed and in place well before the first opportunity to actually write such a contract comes along. So that may already be going on, I just don't know about it, but if it isn't, I thought I'd throw it out there.
I could address that point. What a wonderful setup, talk about this.
Is it the CA report then?
Yeah, so we will be bringing it to the Risk Oversight Committee later this afternoon, and we'll be bringing it to the board in June.
Nice response.
Yeah, that's.
Just came up and bring it this afternoon.
Yeah, and we need to balance, so we'll be asking for some delegation of authority with certain limits, guardrails essentially as to what I'd be able to do. and speed is of the essence, because June 15th is when the first tranche of DA, that's 21 gigawatt hours in our territory, will be known, and September 15th will be the next tranche. And given that you're gonna be dark in July, we need to be out there pretty much right away, working with these some large customers.
All right, anything else, any comments from the board on the plan, the strategic plan?
Yeah, a lot of this has gotten rewritten, and I can share these comments with you later, but
Okay.
like on strategy 1, 2, reward staff to keep them engaged. I would probably restructure this a little bit. I think the most important thing, right, is to make sure that we do a study and that we're paying to market. So I like that point. The other two, I annually update compensation schedule to account for cost of living adjustment. Well, okay, that, I think that ought to be taken into consideration, but.
It's the cost to hire somebody.
The most important thing is that we're competitive. And, you know, then in terms of the other point, through an annual review process, compensate staff accordingly, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of paying for performance. The prime thing has to be we're paying to market, right? We're paying competitively. Cost of living could be something to consider. Performance is certainly something to consider. Making individual adjustments. Yeah, I thought maybe this whole strategy deserved to be first, but,
Switch.
And maybe tweaking it to talk about keeping us competitive, and all the rest are detailed.
well, which is the third
I get
point,
that.
right? We're doing a professional survey. We want to be sure that we're, saying something about the importance of recruiting and retaining great employees.
Mhm.
As a, starting point. Which means we've got to be sensitive to the fact that we have a market here that is,
Yeah. I think this point well taken. If the exec committee is okay with that suggestion, we could rephrase it and move it up.
moving.
I think that is the key point. It's, and under competitive, there's the quantifiable and non-quantifiable, you know, whether it's wellness, health, fun, money, all of those kind of fit under competitive. So,
Well, and it also embraces, okay, the cost of living went up here, and so, yeah, employees. But at the end of the day, right, we have to be sure that employees find incentive to be here as opposed to going elsewhere. Including the cost of hire.
Yeah, just, as I started reading it more closely, I think there is some opportunity to, wordsmith and
Yeah.
like, 1.1 and 1.3 could probably be combined, so I don't know, we wanna do a comprehensive just overview and restructure this a bit, or, and yeah, if you wanna
Well-
take a stab at it, or have some of us do it, whatever works best, but it might be worth looking at, just rewriting it and streamlining it. And at some point, I think this is helpful, but I do agree that a strategic plan should be more, high level, that we don't have to change every 6 months, and then the work plan just
Right.
goes with that year, you could do a yearly or, 2-year, whatever work plan, and that is what can be changed.
What is your idea about this? How do you propose codifying this? Would you bring this to the board at the next meeting?
Yes, we'll bring it in June. So my experience, sorry.
So my question to you is, if we, in the next, when is the board meeting?
June 12th.
If in the next week, those of us on the executive committee
Yeah.
have had a chance to read this,
Yeah.
just send you some comments,
That would be
you could
perfect.
incorporate them, right?
That would be perfect.
Or say no, whatever.
Yeah. I think something like
Just trying to be
that,
helpful, right?
something like that would be very helpful.
Okay.
And just overall,
And Howard, the master of HR, I'm sure wants to do this through.
is that finances?
Whatever, he's a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
I just read this stuff, I think it's.
So I tell you, I've done several strategic plans in many organizations. The huge value comes in just being engaged and going through the process.
Sure.
And then there's diminishing returns that set in very quickly after that.
Right.
To get to the perfect kind of thing, and that's why it's not,
This is not about just rewriting.
because this becomes, so I'll tell you, the value is all the directors have taken a look at it and done a little scrubbing. And I think when the exec committee does a similar thing in the next week, that's gonna, I think, get us 80% of the value. Because now it's in front of you, you get a sense of it.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a living document
Right.
in the end.
And just
Value
being
is looking-
aware.
Is reading it.
Yeah.
Commenting it.
So could you send us,
We'll
soft
send you the Word
copy
document.
with the track changes?
Yes.
And then we can just.
We will do that.
have our-
Send it out today.
Great.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, any
And,
public
sorry, so
Oh,
you'll
sorry,
get that
Nancy.
back to us
Oh, yeah, that's
um,
a deadline.
next week.
That's
So
right.
actually, maybe next Thursday, 30th?
Okay.
Yeah, that'll give us a little time to,
Nancy.
Yeah, I'm glad you I agree with the comments about the staff section. I would point out that the goal itself has performance in it, to respond to some of my colleagues' comments, that it is to build a high-performing team, so performance is part of the goal, which is good, but I think explicitly in the strategies would be good. I also like that you explained that it's part working document, part strategic document, because a lot of it is fairly non-strategic.
Yeah.
But I do like the text for the decarbon grid innovation programs, where you call it out, climate change is the greatest existential threat of our time. So you don't mince words, and I'm glad it's there. Okay?
Hey, anything else on this?
thank
Okay.
you very much.
So we have our CEO update.
I don't have any updates, and, right up front, I talked about AB 56, so there's lots of stuff going on the legislative side. Thank you all for your engagement in that.
Did you text
I missed that part.
So AB 56,
Well, no, I mean, I know what it is, but what was your update about it?
well, the update is the vote could happen at any
We
time.
have all
Right.
next year.
And just thanking you for, and I said
This
that
morning.
most of our electors have indicated either abstention or no. We haven't been able to get in touch with Assembly Member
Sometimes it takes all day.
Lowe yet, or we haven't got a response yet, so we don't know where it stands on it.
Yeah. Never mind. I mean,
Okay.
those things, just watch it.
We're going to have, I'll just, the June meeting and the August meeting are going to be quite full. We have quite a few items coming up that we've teed up. You're gonna have direct access pricing policies, you're gonna have the rate update, the strategic plan. We are working furiously on getting admin support for our programs, so that once we get the admin support, we can actually get to the launch state faster.
Would you contract that or what?
Yeah, we'll contract that, yes. So the RFP's gone out, they had about,
Responses are back, yeah, we have a lot of very high quality responses.
Yeah.
3 different classes of support we're looking for. The smallest is EM and V, so verification of program effectiveness, and you can't use the same party for that supported the program rollout for clear reasons. Anyway, 3 categories, we're doing the interviews next week.
so there's gonna be quite a few items on the consent calendar, because many of these are not policy issues, they may be relatively big dollars, but things like hiring the admin support for programs, not a policy, so it's there, of course, you can pull it at any time. also we'll be bringing you some innovation programs. We sent out our innovation on-ramp RFP, we got a ton of responses. And one of the responses could end up being more than $100,000. So we'll bring that in as part of this meeting. And then August, of course, we'll be setting up on the budget. And then at the June meeting, Margaret will be also talking about my performance appraisal. So that'll come up at the June meeting. Just setting the stage,
Oh,
timeline and things like that.
yeah,
Oh, I see.
it won't
Yeah.
be the meat of it.
Open for any questions?
I'm just putting it out there, I'm driving to Sacramento that evening after the meeting, so.
Unfortunately.
Okay, so
We're gonna try to go as fast and efficiently as we
Yeah.
possibly
it's
can.
5-hour energy.
It's a big agenda.
Yeah.
It's safer that way than driving up for me
Yeah.
the morning before,
Yeah.
just saying.
Mm.
Okay, yeah, we'll try to keep it
We're
moving.
on track in the morning is your friend.
It's 10:40.
Yes, I know, isn't that great?
I know, great job.
Maybe if I put the time of it at the beginning, we can get it done quicker.
Oh, you just didn't wanna have me chair the meeting.
All right, is there anything else? Anything from James? No? All right, we are adjourned then.
Yeah.
Thank you, have a great, long weekend.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
Yes,
you.
Yeah,